Hi guys, welcome to lecture 5. This is our last lecture for the unit. We're going to start talking about coevolution. So coevolution is when two interacting species evolve adaptations that allow them to continue to associate. So for example, organisms that are in a mutualistic or mutualism relationship, like bees and flowers. We also have organisms that are in a predator-prey relationship, like mustard plant and cabbage butterflies. And we have organisms in a parasitic relationship. So, for example, the predator-prey, the mustard plant and the cabbage butterflies, those plants that produced more bitter oils were able to survive and reproduce, and they became more common. The butterfly larvae that could tolerate the more bitter oils were also surviving and reproducing. So the result was the populations over time that were more and more bitter and the larvae that could tolerate more and more bitterness coincided. So let's look at a sample question here. Structures as different as human arms and dolphin flippers contained in many of the same bones, these bones having developed from the same embryonic tissues. How do biologists interpret these similarities? So, my apologies, this is actually a review question from our last lecture. So, if you look at these, take a moment and decide which one you think it would be. So, the obvious choice to me would be by proposing that humans and dolphins share a common ancestor. That's what we talked about last time. So let's talk about evolution and the different paces or rates that happen. First, there's gradualism, and then second, there's punctuated equilibrium. So some of the models suggest that evolution actually occurs gradually, which is called gradualism. Other models suggest that it's rapid, which is called punctuated equilibrium. And this is in times of ecological stress. So this one on the left, this is the gradualism. And this one on the right is the punctuated equilibrium. So you can see that this is gradually, this change here, right over here, this is gradually happening. Versus here, we start with one butterfly, and then something happens right here, causing a change. Something happens right here, and it's causing a change. Or, my apologies, right here, not there. So, this is punctuated equilibrium, because there are periods of little to no change, but then there are periods of huge changes that occur very rapidly. And of course, the rate of these changes, it's always going to depend on the species as well. So let's talk about mass extinctions and rapid evolution. So history shows that we have actually had 5 mass extinctions due to environmental changes. So these changes are going to allow for what is called adaptive radiation as new niches are created or open up to living species. During the 5th mass extinction found in the fossil record, niches were vacated by the dinosaur extinction, and this in turn allowed mammals to radiate to these niches. So the dinosaur extinction is theorized to have occurred due to an asteroid striking the Earth. So, one thing that I do want to note is on the AP exam, you're not going to need to know exactly when these mass extinctions occurred. However, you may want to have a roundabout. So, for instance, here, this is a mass extinction. It happened at about 500 million years ago. There's another one at about 400, another one at about 300, and one at 200. And then there's one right here, which was about 65 million years ago. You should be familiar with at least one of them. And since the one that we know or are most familiar with is the dinosaurs, then I would make sure to remember that dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago. Okay, so moving on. So the way that they determine this is, you can see here are the fossils. And so this is where the dinosaurs, this level, and they also go here into the Jurassic. So this is just the fossil levels. So we know that there have been 5 mass extinctions, and there is talk that the Earth is on the brink of a 6th mass extinction. And they say it's going to be the humans' fault. So the first reason, there's 2 reasons. The first one is our ecosystems are being altered by humans. The first is habitat destruction. And then the second one, of course, is pollution. So, the habitat destruction by our activity is the #1 cause of extinction. The problem is that most organisms cannot move if the habitat is destroyed. They cannot switch resources. So organisms have figured out how to adapt in specific living environments with unique adaptations in order to be able to feed on the food that they need. So they cannot survive in a different location due to habitat destruction. So let's talk about variation and extinction. So the greater variation or biodiversity is going to lead to greater changes of survival. Populations that have less variation are going to be more likely to go extinct due to the absence of possible advantageous traits. Sexual reproduction, for instance, is going to lead to that greater variation compared to asexual. And asexual does have its advantages in an unchanging environment as well. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. And we've talked about some of these previously. But the advantages for sexual reproduction is that it creates a population with genetic variation. It also creates populations that are more diverse, and they will be able to survive better in a changing environment. And it could give some individuals a selective advantage. So the disadvantage is that it takes longer for offspring to develop. It also takes more energy to care and develop the young. It takes more energy to develop the reproductive structures necessary. And it takes more energy to find a mate. So the advantages and disadvantages for asexual reproduction. Advantage, it takes less time, less energy. They reproduce at a faster rate in a non-changing environment, and there's no mate required. The disadvantage is there is no genetic variation at all. And a change in the environment can lead to death of every single member of the population. So, positive impacts that we can make as humans. We know that we need to protect natural habitats. We also know that we need to restore those habitats that we have destroyed. We also need to maintain variation by protecting different species. We've got captive breeding programs going, and we've also got outbreeding. And with these tools, we have brought several species back from the verge of extinction. Okay, so now we need to talk about the origin of life and the order of events. So we know that specific atoms were present during the early formation of the Earth, and they basically reacted to form simple organic molecules. For instance, like water, ammonia, which I think is NH2 if I'm not mistaken, hydrogen, and methane. And then we know that inorganic molecules, for the next step, reacted, and together they formed simple organic molecules. And some examples of those would be amino acids, nucleotides, monosaccharides, and lipids. Now I want to remind you, if you don't remember the different molecules involved, make sure you write these down. Amino acids is CHON, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Nucleotides is CHONP, CHONP, so we add that phosphorus on the end. Then we've got monosaccharides of CHO, CHO, and lipids also of CHO. So then these simple organic monomers reacted and they formed organic polymers and macromolecules such as proteins. We know that nucleotides formed our nucleic acids. We know that monosaccharide formed our carbs. And then we have lipids. So there is a RNA first hypothesis, and it is believed that the RNA actually formed before the DNA because of RNA's many properties. So RNA, we know, can act like genetic material, and it can also act like an enzyme. And the fact that it has so many diverse functions makes us pretty sure that it evolved first. So next, once the Earth had organic molecules, these reacted to form structures, what are called cells. So the simple cell-like structures, they had a membrane, they could divide in two, they could trap molecules, they could enfold different compartments, and they became more complex over time. And they can allow molecules in and out, and they are actually referred to as protobionts. So we know that we can produce these structures in a lab by combining simple organic molecules. And these structures can also be called liposomes, coacervates, and microspheres. So the protobionts that acquired more complex properties and organizations over time to form what we know as prokaryotic cells. And the first prokaryotic cells were believed to be chemoheterotrophs. And they basically consumed molecules for their energy use. And then we have photoautotrophs, which do not photosynthesize. They produced atmosphere. The produced atmosphere evolved later and actually produced the Earth's oxygen and ozone, which you know the ozone protects us from harsh UV rays. So it's important that you understand that oxygen was not present on early Earth, and that today on Earth we actually have these cyanobacteria that are photosynthesizing bacteria believed to be very similar to the original autotrophs, and they have structures similar to the chloroplast in plant cells. And scientists actually also believe that the cyanobacteria could have been engulfed by other prokaryotic cells, leading to the evolution of the chloroplasts in cells forming eukaryotic cells. And this is referred to, again, we've talked about this before, but it is the endosymbiotic theory of evolution, and you need to be familiar with those. Next, we've got the eukaryotic cells. They develop due to the endosymbiosis of smaller cells, along with the enfoldings of the membrane. And this created the nucleus and the organelle systems of the endomembrane system, such as the smooth ER, the rough ER, the Golgi apparatus, and the nuclear envelope. So basically what it's saying is that we had this prokaryotic cell, enfolding of the plasma membrane began, and then this is where the endosymbiosis actually began. So you've got the chloroplast and the mitochondria, and that led to the first eukaryotic cell. So last, cells forming colonies led to the formation of multicellular organisms in the oceans. So let's talk about dates for early life. So we have evidence from many different models for the origin of life. We have the geological evidence, and it shows that the Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago, but that Earth was actually too hostile for life until 3.9 billion years ago. And to this date, the earliest fossil that we have dates back to 3.5 billion years ago. So that means that the first living organism probably developed around 3.8 billion years ago. So there's a couple of scientists named Miller and Urey, and they conducted experiments, and they showed that it's possible to form complex organic molecules from inorganic molecules in the absence of life. And what they said was that you must have proteins, carbs, lipids, and nucleic acids to make cells. They were testing what is called the primordial soup theory, or the organic soup theory. And basically it states that life began in a pond or an ocean as a result of the combination of chemicals from the atmosphere and some form of energy in order to make simple organic molecules. So they actually created this apparatus to model conditions on early Earth and to contain inorganic molecules expected to be on primitive Earth. And what they found was they ended up getting the formation of organic molecules, such as amino acids. So basically what they did was they introduced ammonia, methane, and hydrogen gases, as well as water vapor. And this is what they thought was in primitive Earth's atmosphere. So we've got the organic molecules down here, or this is what appears after a few days. So the first thing is we get the boiling water. It adds water vapor to the artificial atmosphere. And then we have to have some sort of energy input. So there's actually an electric spark that simulates a lightning storm. And then that energy powers the reaction that was thought to be present in the early atmosphere. And then when the hot gases are cooled by this cool water flow, the water vapor condenses and anything left basically dissolves. And then we end up with this organic molecules a few days later. So they simulated lightning, which could offer the energy that they needed to form the molecules. The water vapor condenses and the molecules in the atmosphere form raindrops that fell back into the ocean. And then the organic molecules would have been detected in the ocean. It's important to note that there was no atmospheric oxygen on primitive Earth, because oxygen binds to the organic molecules, or the monomers, to prevent them from binding into macromolecules. So, the last thing that I want to talk about is the life between the sheets model. And this is something that if you're taking the AP exam, I would encourage you to look up. But basically, what it says is that reaction sets could have occurred on reactive surfaces. So they're basically hypothesizing that there could have been these sheets of mica, and it provided stable environments in order to create the organic molecules. So definitely take a look at that if you're going to take the AP exam, just so that you're familiar with it. You don't have to study it a lot, but that is all I've got. I will see you in class. Have a great night.